We live in a simulation, a real simulation. The world we experience our entire lives within isn't the real actual world, and even we aren't our real actual selves. The bright, colorful world of physical objects in three-dimensional space we see around us simply doesn't exist. It's a complete illusion that's being computed by a program. We're a virtual being living in a virtual reality. But this simulation isn't being programmed by an alien programmer in a movie, but by our own brains. Our own brain is the alien programmer that programs our simulation. It constructs both ourselves and the entire world we see around us, and places us inside that world to live out our lives. Our brain constructs its simulation of reality from the raw abstract data of actual reality, reorganizes it into simple logical data structures, and then paints those structures with meanings and appearances to create the illusion of the bright physical world we see around us. So the bright physical world is actually a virtual world playing out in our brains, and our brains project it into the virtual reality we think we see around us. So the world we experience is a huge illusion. It's a virtual reality being computed by our brains. Our brains tell us it's real, but this is an enormous trick. However, all is not lost. There is a real world beyond our simulation, and our simulation is part of that world and embedded within it. This real world consists entirely of programs continually computing their data, and our simulation is just one of those programs continually computing the data of ourselves. And because our simulation is embedded in the actual world, we can discover the true nature of the actual world by discovering how our simulation obscures it. Our simulation must obviously have sufficient logical correspondence with the real world for us to function and survive within it. So our brain samples the logic of the real world and builds its simulation on this logical framework. But then it extensively colors these logical structures with meanings and appearances to make them seem more interesting and useful. So our brain's simulation of reality isn't arbitrary, but a finely tuned evolutionary adaptation designed to help us function more effectively in actual reality by making it easier to compute. But in doing so, it completely misrepresents the true nature of reality and hides it within multiple veils of illusion. And only when we understand these veils of illusion and how they work are we able to lift them and discover the deep reality revealed within. So all the appearances of the world are illusions created by our brains, and we can confirm this by removing them one by one to discover the true nature of the actual world that underlies them all. There we find the actual world is computational, and everything is the data of what it is, and nothing more. All else is appearance, and exists only in our simulations of reality rather than in reality itself. The first of our simulation's veils of illusion is our personal programming. Our programs are learning systems that learn from our experiences beginning in infancy. Thus our simulations are highly programmed by our parents, peers, and the media and culture of our society. As a result, our simulations are heavily programmed with the beliefs that compose our personal worldviews. These include the full spectrum of often misinformed and even delusional belief systems, prejudices, and ideologies based on ethnic and gender identities, religious beliefs, interpersonal relationships, and political and interest affiliations. All these beliefs become incorporated into our simulations and are projected back onto reality as if they are actually real. This also includes the notion of an objective morality, an objective good and evil. Morality and ethics are social constructs that evolved to help stabilize societies. These aspects of human culture are highly adaptive because they tend to suppress interpersonal conflicts that destabilize social order. But as aspects of personal programming, morality and good and evil aren't objective attributes of reality. All this extensive personal programming makes it increasingly difficult for people to recognize the true nature of reality within their overly cluttered simulations. And because people think their simulations are reality, they tend to act in accordance with their personal programming, even at the expense of common sense and well-being. In essence, there are two kinds of people: those who realize they've been programmed and try to transcend their programming, and those who think they are their programming. Unfortunately, most people fall into the second category. Such people have little chance of realizing the true nature of reality, even though it lies clear before them. In particular, our personal programming includes the desires and attachments that Buddhism rightly identifies as the source of emotional suffering. Because personal programming is learned behavior, it can be reprogrammed and brought closer to objective truth. There are two basic methods that help to do this. The first is to make conscious circular negative thought chains and break them by replacing weak links with links that connect to positive thought chains. The other method is simply to ignore them and let them gradually fade away. By becoming mindful of the presence of a dysfunctional chain, one can just let it pass on its own without attaching attention or importance to it. As humans, we all have desires and attachments, but the key is not to be attached to our attachments. When we realize we are our running program, we find we have considerable ability to reprogram it and make it happier, healthier, and more successful. We can potentially change our personal programming as much as we like, within the constraints of reality, of course. Now, all species view the world through their sensory and perceptual systems and conceive of the world in terms of their own conceptual structures, and these vary widely among species. Thus, every species views the world differently, and every species thinks its simulation is actual reality. But since every simulation of every species and individual is different, none can be true representations of reality, including our own. The sense organs of different species are tuned to enormous ranges of sensory information. Different species pick up widely different ranges of light and sound waves, chemical odors and tastes, and they pick them up with very different resolutions. And many species have sensory organs humans completely lack. But in all cases, species base their simulations of reality on the particular range of sensory information they're tuned to receive. And then their very different conceptual structures use this sensory input to construct very different simulations of reality. In this way, the simulations of bees, jellyfish, eagles, sharks, and humans are all very different. But in all cases, each species is completely convinced that the world its simulation creates is the actual reality they all share, when this is clearly impossible. Thus, each species experiences its simulation as reality, and none, including humans, experience it as it actually is. Even if we know better intellectually, we can't help looking out in the world of our sensations and thinking that's the way the world actually is. But nothing could be further from the truth. As individuals, we're only at one place in time at once, in only one orientation, scale, motion, and perceived clock time rate at once. But reality itself has no intrinsic position, orientation, scale, motion, or clock time rate. This makes it impossible to experience the true nature of reality. As individual observers, we experience the world entirely from the perspective of our own singularity and relative to ourselves. As a result, we think reality exists in terms of a perspective relative to us, but this isn't true. In reality, the universe exists in no perspective at all and from all possible perspectives at once. It's perspective independent, but able to accommodate all possible perspectives. It's what's called a frame-independent structure. Now, the only frame-independent structures are logico-mathematical. In fact, the great beauty of the equations of relativity is that they're frame-independent. This means everything is expressed in terms of relationships with other things rather than with respect to any absolute reference frame. This allows any observer to overlay his own reference frame, and all frames produce equally valid views. Thus, the positions, scales, orientations, motions, and perceived clock time rates of objects in the universe are all characteristics seen by individual observers and vary widely among observers. This means the universe itself and the things within it have no intrinsic position, scale, orientation, motion, or perceived clock time rates. So the universe is very different when viewed by an ant, an elephant, or a human. Sizes aren't actual aspects of reality. And the universe has no orientation, since orientation depends mainly on the gravitational orientations of the observer, which will be upside down to observers on opposite sides of the planet. Thus things have no intrinsic orientation, though we always imagine them having one relative to ourselves. Every organism has its own biological clock rate and perceives the clock time rate of all events relative to its own internal rate. Thus fast reacting organisms like flies and chipmunks perceive events happening at a slower rate than we do, and elephants and great whales perceive them happening at a faster rate. The perceived internal clock time rate is roughly related to the size of organisms and the time it takes for nerve impulses to move across the body. So all these dimensional aspects of the universe we think are intrinsic are actually observer-dependent and exist only in the presence of an observer. Thus the universe itself simply has no locations, scales, orientations, or perceptual clock time rates. These aspects of dimensionality are all aspects of observer simulations that simply don't exist in reality. And the only way this can be true is if the universe is a frame-independent computational structure consisting entirely of data. Now the world we see around us is a world of appearances painted over a colorless logical structure. The logical structure is sampled from the actual world, but every last appearance is produced by our own brains. Cognitive scientists are well aware of the fact that all appearances are products of our brains. They call them qualia and recognize they are private experiences that exist only in our own minds. However, they never seem to understand what this implies about reality. Reality itself simply has no appearances, and this can be true only if the universe is computational and consists entirely of data. Reality itself simply has no colors, odors, sounds, tastes, or touches. These are all created in our simulations and painted over the logical structures we sample from reality to make it more interesting and meaningful and easier to compute. We think of the world around us as a colorful world full of sounds, shapes, textures, odors, and tastes, but every one of these is created in our simulation and doesn't exist in reality itself. Of course, photons of various frequencies exist. Particle structures transmit sound waves, and molecules carry the information we interpret as odors and tastes, but it's our simulation that experiences these as colors, sounds, odors, and tastes. Our simulation creates appearances from our interactions with the raw data of reality, paints them over the data structures, and then projects them back out into a virtual world it itself constructs. And then our simulation tells us the simulated things out there in its virtual reality are real, actual things that have colors and textures and produce sounds and smells, when the entire world of appearance is actually produced in our brains and produced very differently in the brains of other species. Thus all the appearances of everything in the world, without exception, are illusions produced by our simulation. Actual reality and everything in it simply has no colors, textures, odors, or tastes. The world of appearances is a complete illusion. And when we subtract all the appearances from reality, we're left only with running programs, computing data, confirming what all the evidence suggests. When we remove all colors, smells, tastes, sounds, feelings, and other appearances from reality, all that's left is their data. So appearances are information about how our program interacts with external reality, and the entire world of appearances is a huge illusion. Now, in the previous deep reality talk on emergence, we discovered how the discrete things in our simulation are actually based on fuzzy, overlapping hierarchical domains in the entanglement network, and how they are seen differently by different species and individuals. This means that we tend to think of reality in terms of individual things, characteristics, processes, actors, actions, and events as an illusion constructed by our simulation. Actual reality consists of myriads of raw, overlapping patterns, and one of the main tasks of the simulation is to extract discrete, meaningful things from those patterns. This is called pattern recognition, and it's been studied for years to enable robot vision to extract meaningful things from fluid visual backgrounds. Simulations use pattern recognition algorithms to construct individual things from raw sensory input. This is highly adaptive as it enables living organisms to use the relatively simple logic of things to compute their actions within their environments. Thus, the world full of discrete physical things we seem to see around us is just another illusion created by our simulation. What's really out there is myriads of raw data patterns, and every species makes sense of it in very different ways. The things and relationships that fleas, birds, humans, and roundworms see the world in terms of are all very different. Even the visual appearances of things are illusions based on the structures of our eyes. Light in the external world isn't focused into images of things. Images are only constructed by eyes with lenses. There are no images of things out there in actual reality. Actual reality is raw data devoid of things. Now, one of the most interesting things the simulation constructs is the objective self. The fact that our objective selves are illusions has important implications for the nature of the true self, as we'll see in the deep reality talk on realization. The objective self, like most other things, is constructed in infancy through a process of pattern recognition and updated throughout our lives. In other species, this process doesn't develop to the extent it does in humans, but nevertheless they manage to function quite well in their own simulations of reality. So the objective self isn't a necessary aspect of the simulation. However, it's quite clear that all organisms must compute their actions in terms of a self that's distinct from the world to survive. Fulfilling their instinctual imperatives depends on this distinction. The objective self includes the concept of our physical body. This only developed to its current level with the advent of mirrors and later photography and video, which allowed people to see themselves freely as objects. These technologies created a much stronger identification of self with the mental construct of the physical body. Prior to the modern obsession with objective self, we thought of ourselves much more as animals do in terms of the subjective self, of our direct experiences, perceptions, feelings, actions, and thoughts as experienced from the inside. This is much closer to our true identity, which is the totality of direct experience. So our concept of ourselves as an objective thing with a physical body is as much an illusion as the other things in our simulation. These are concepts that are useful in computing our functioning, but they're fundamentally misleading illusions that obscure the true, deeper nature of reality. The illusion of a physical world consisting of physical objects in a physical space-time is one even science is unable to shake. This is atavistic considering what physical actually means in science. Physical is ultimately just a label for something having mass, energy, or dimensionality. But as we've seen in previous deep reality talks, dimensionality is simply the consistency among dimensional data generated by particle interactions. And mass energy is simply numeric spatial velocity within that consistency. Even atoms are known to be almost entirely empty, so even these last bastions of physicality reduce to the information of what they are. But our minds still tell us the world is a physical world, so how can this be? The answer is that the apparent physicality of things just depends on their information structure. And with a little practice, we can actually look at things and see they are just the information of what they are. All we need to do is carefully analyze anything physical into all its separate information components, such as its color, shape, texture, heft, and so forth, and then just mentally remove these information components one by one to see what's left without them. We quickly discover that after all the information content of anything is removed, there's simply nothing left of it. It's completely gone. So the apparent physicality of things is simply a combination of the kinds of information our minds tell us makes a physical thing. In this way, we can directly see that every physical thing is actually just a combination of specific types of information. Everything is just the information of what it is, and only that. Now, one could argue this just proves our experience of things is information, and that there are real physical things out there producing our experiences, but there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that, and certainly no way to prove it. There are clearly actual computational processes outside our experiences, but thinking they're physical is just projecting how we experience them back onto them. So how else could our simulations so convincingly encode the real actual world as neural data if it wasn't actually data? When we think this through, it's intuitive and easy to understand. The only thing that can ever be experienced is information. We experience only information, and our simulation just calls some kinds of information, such as heavy, hard, opaque shapes, physical objects. But in reality, every last thing we can experience is just from some kind of information. Because our experience consists entirely of information, and ultimately the experience of information is all that can be confirmed to exist. Thus, all the apparent physical and material things in the universe are actually just the information of what they are. They are simply the associations of their different information components. Everything that exists in the entire observable universe is the complete information of what it is, and that's all it is. This is the fundamental principle of things. After all, our entire experience of anything exists only as its information in our brains. Thus, the apparent physicality of the entire observable universe is clearly just data labels slapped on certain types of data associations. It's all data. And even if the world was physical, nothing would change, since it can only be experienced in terms of its information. So physicality couldn't even be experienced even if it did exist. Thus, all the evidence suggests reality is simply the data of what it is, and our simulation of reality clearly confirms this. So everything is the information of what it is, but the information of what it is the current result of its entire computational history, stretching all the way back to the Big Bang and the complete fine-tuning. Thus, everything that exists is the information of its computational history, and that's all it is. But it gets even better. A form's computational history is its interactions with other forms, and all interactions are exchanges of information among forms. Thus, the information that forms are is loaded with information about the other forms they interacted with. The information a thing is now is a recording of the information of its past interactions, and that's all it is. So the past information of the universe is simply redistributed among its current information forms to become the information that things are now. Everything is the information of its past interactions with other things, and that's all anything is. So the information of an autumn leaf lying on the lawn isn't just its shape and color and position, but the complete computational history of all the forces that gave that leaf its shape, color, and position. It's all the exact temperature, sunlight, and breezes that brought it to its exact current condition and position. The information of the leaf is now includes the information of everything in the entire history of the universe that in any way affected its current state, from the effects of the seasonal rotation of the Earth to the evolution of the DNA of its species. All this information is hidden within the current information of the leaf lying on the lawn. And all this information actually is the leaf lying on the lawn at this exact moment of time, and that's all the leaf actually is. Thus everything that exists is packed with information about other things. Everything is the combined information of all its interactions with the other things that computed the exact information of what it currently is, and everything is its entire computational history with other things. Thus everything that exists is a recording of the past information of the universe from the perspective of its past computational interactions. And all these recordings in combination encode an enormous body of data about the past. All the information of the entire history of the universe is redistributed among all its current information forms. And these current information forms are what things actually are, and that's all they are. The universe consists entirely of information forms, and all information forms are empty of anything other than information. The entire universe consists only of information, and this information is the information of its entire past computational history, and that's all it is. Now, only because everything contains information about other things is the universe knowable. This is the Sherlock Holmes principle that underlies all knowledge. By deeply understanding the information of things, we gain knowledge of other things. Thanks to the complete fine-tuning, forms in our universe are packed with information about other forms, and our universe is richly knowable. And we exist only because our universe is knowable. Our experiences of time are also full of illusion. First, our simulation encodes memories of past events, which gives us a sense of sequential time, which is completely lacking in actual reality, since everything actually exists only in the current present moment. It's only organisms with memories that have any sense of sequential time, and only this enables them to plan meaningful actions. And our simulation also places our consciousness in an illusory present moment of several seconds duration called our short-term memory. By contrast, the actual present moment of the universe is far shorter than the fastest particle interaction because it computes them all. Only our open present moment gives us time to compare and make sense of events as they occur. Only this enables us to understand processes as sequences of events. Without this, the world would be totally meaningless, and all events would occur without context. Processes like music and language that depend on running comparisons of events would be completely meaningless. Since our short-term memory is a product of our simulation, it's quite likely its duration and character vary significantly among species. Though this insight is apparently original with me from 2009, it's really quite obvious. Second, the human brain continually constructs its own internal narrative, which is usually aligned with the reality by incoming data streams, except in dreams, wherein sensory input is reduced, and to a lesser extent in daydreams. An important aspect of this narrative is that the simulation continually plays a stream of slightly future expected events as if they were actually happening. Thus we seem to live in a stream of events we expect to happen as if they were already happening. This gives us an important adaptive edge in quickly reacting to actual events. In most cases, this prediction stream is reasonably accurate on a second-by-second time frame, but as a result, we seem to live slightly in the future. So we live in a simulation programmed by our own brains. The bright world we see around us is actually only data in our brains, and all its appearances are illusions. So when we look out into the world, we're actually looking into our own minds. Absolutely everything we see and experience in the world out there is actually happening in here. The only contribution actual reality makes is a little logical structure, and even that's completely reworked. Our mind receives colorless data points, arranges them into color-by-number images of things, and then paints them with appearances to construct a bright, colorful world. It then reifies this world and projects it around us, populating it with things it itself creates. Even our own concept of self is just one of the things our simulation places in this virtual world. And to compound the illusion, our mind insists this virtual world is the real actual world, but nothing could be further from the truth. The world we see around us is a virtual reality running in our brains. So when we look out into the world, we are actually looking into the workings of our own brains. The logic of the real world is back there somewhere directing the show, but all the costumes, actors, sets, and significances are produced and staged in our simulation. Thus we look directly and deeply into our own being when we look out into the world. And if we only look deeply enough at what's really going on out there, we begin to see what's really going on in here. We begin to see the reality of ourselves within the illusion. So beneath all the veils of illusion, we are inevitably led to a single conclusion, that the world and everything in it, including us, consists only of the information of what it is, being continually recomputed by the running program of the universe. This concludes our Deep Reality Talk on the real simulation. Stay tuned for the next Deep Reality Talk on existence, immanence, and consciousness, where we finally discover reality's most profound and deepest secrets. Subscribe to stay informed.